All right, so good morning, everyone. My name is Jesse, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. If you're joining us for the first time, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. But this week in particular is a really, really exciting week, probably our most exciting week of the entire school year. And I want to highlight why before we dive in with our specific speaker today. So this is my first time giving a land acknowledgement. It's something that a lot of you might have experienced in events over the last few years. It's a really exciting transition as we continue to highlight the amazing contributions of Indigenous peoples to Canada, past, present, and future. And so, as we gather, we are reminded that throughout Canada, we're situated on Indigenous land, both ceded treaty land and unceded land. This land is steeped in rich Indigenous history and home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people today. As a country, we have a responsibility for the stewardship of the land on which we live and work. And today, I acknowledge the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and neutral people whose traditional territory I'm broadcasting from. So it's land acknowledgements like that that actually highlight those people to me over the last year and a half. We also work with the Vancouver Aquarium. They always highlight the amazing peoples of that part of Canada as well. And I hope that that is something that encourages all of you to keep the learning going, get excited, and find out more about the amazing people, again, past and present, that live on this incredible land that many of us call Canada. Today, we are diving back in with Secret Path Week. So all week long, we have been highlighting amazing speakers from across Canada as part of a national movement commemorating the legacies of Gord Downie and Chanie Wenjack. The Gord Downie and Chanie Wenjack Fund would like to inspire all Canadian classrooms to use this week to answer Gord Downie's call to action and do something as we share knowledge towards meaningful reconciliation. So today, we are joined live by Chelsea Vowel. She is joining us in Edmonton, and she does it all. She is a Métis woman. She is a mother of 6, an educator at the University of Alberta, a podcast producer, an author, a blogger, and more. She's done so many incredible things to help highlight Indigenous history, language, and more with communities across Canada. I'm really excited to have her today. I hope you guys are excited, whether you're joining live or on YouTube, to hear her story and to learn a little bit and ask some great questions. So without further ado, thank you so much for joining us today, Chelsea, and take us away.
Danse. Chelsea Vowel nitsirason mantow-sâkahikan nitotsin egwa niwigin uta amiskwacîwâskihikan kanots otpem Susqueha mania po apitagosasan esqueha mania egwa nigotwasek nitotansen. So my name is Chelsea Vowel. I'm from Lac Ste. I'm Métis, and I am working and living right now, I mean, where we all are in our homes mostly, but in Edmonton. And I have a bit of a presentation to show you, to go through before we start some questions. I want to spend most of our time on questions. So I'm just going to get this up. All right. Okay. So I guess I want to focus on the fact that, like, honestly, you know, people say these things. They're like, oh, she's an author and this and that. But really, my life is just a series of cool projects. And so if I could like impart one piece of advice to you, it would be just to do the thing. If you're interested in something, just do the thing. Okay. All right. So this is the information that I gave you. This is the name of my community, manitow-sâkahikan, which is Lac Ste. In English. And I'm Métis writer, educator, mom to 6. So I'm always exhausted, always frazzled. I have 18-year-olds, and I have little toddlers in the house, usually screaming around somewhere above me. And I get to teach the Cree language, which is called Nekiawewin. That's what I do at the University of Alberta right now. And it's honestly like my dream job. My whole life, that's all I wanted to do, was have time to do nothing but study Cree and teach it. It's awesome. It's the best thing in the world. All right. So how did sort of everything start for me? I'm not going to go back to like when I was born. I'm going to go back to 2011. And this was sort of the beginning of Idle No More. And it started like this. I started arguing with people on the internet. So people were making all sorts of racist comments under all the articles that were published online about Indigenous peoples. It could literally be, Native man gets hit by a car while crossing the street. Okay, terrible, right? But underneath the comments were like, yeah, but he doesn't pay taxes and he gets a free house and blah, 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 blah. I'm like, guy got hit by a car. Who cares his tax status or if he gets a free house and all this stuff? And so I would argue with people about it. I would say, look, this is a myth. You're regurgitating myths. And I would argue with people. And then I would see like Joe Blow 27, right? he would be in an article commenting, and I would give him all the information I had about, Native people paying taxes. And then I would see that same guy, Joe Blow 27, in another article saying the same thing. And I was like, I already told you this information. So I decided to put this into a blog post instead of arguing in the comments. And then every time somebody made that argument, Native people don't pay taxes, I would just give them the link, right? So I did that, and one of my pieces went viral, like really viral. Okay, so I wrote a thing that made a lot of people angry, but a lot more people loved it. So I started talking about Attawapiskat, which is a Cree community in Northern Ontario. People were like, wow, they've been given so much money. How come they're still, experiencing so many bad things? And I broke down, the amount of money and showed how it was being used and how it was insufficient. So after that, I started writing more and more articles about, all sorts of things, questions that people have. Do Indigenous peoples get free houses? Do we not pay taxes? Is it true that there's a gene that Indigenous peoples have that make them more likely to become alcoholics? Things like that. So I started writing that. And down here, I was like, I was also avoiding exams. So don't do like me. A lot of my projects I call them procrasto inspiration. So I have ADHD, and I often get really, really hyper-focused on projects. I'm like super into it, to the exclusion of everything else, including deadlines. And oddly enough, I get super hyper-focused when deadlines are nearing. So it's like, oh, you have this big essay due. Better go and do this huge project. Not a great use of time, but sometimes it does end up bringing you to cool places. So all that writing eventually turned into this book, Indigenous Rights, which is, and it's a guide to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit issues in Canada. It was really cool to put together. So there's 31 chapters. I do a bunch of myth busting and information about treaties and this and that. It's sort of like a 101 introduction to Indigenous issues. Originally, I'd pitched a book that was like 60 chapters, and the publisher was like, we can't sell a book that thick. So there's a lot of things that I didn't get to talk about in this book that eventually maybe I will do in another one. Also around this time, I had other deadlines to avoid, so I made a silly video game called Idle No More Blockade. This was like feverishly done over 3 days. It's an RPG game. It's real cheesy. You play this young Cree land defender named Sâkahikan, who has to raise help to oppose a pipeline that's being built across Sundance fields. So some people picked up on this and were like, she's trying to encourage the youth to like rebel and not respect the law. And I thought that was funny because these kinds of projects like pipelines or things like that are done without, prior informed consent of free prior and informed consent of Indigenous peoples violate the law and the land. So anyway. All right. Around that time too, I also started co-hosting a podcast with my bud, Molly Swain. And that was wild. So we go from a podcast to a land trust. And I wanted to talk about how that progressed. Okay, so our podcast is called amiskwacîwâskihikan, which means Métis in space, and it's an Indigenous feminist sci-fi podcast. Okay, we really do focus on sci-fi. We explore portrayals of indigeneity in sci-fi, series, movies, sometimes even videos. We're both huge nerds, and we just started this for fun in 2015. But it soon turned into something more. Originally, when we started, we thought, nobody but our moms will listen to this. Turns out our moms don't actually listen to it, but it became much more popular than we expected. So this is our cool logo. I love it so much. We joined the Indian and Cowboy podcast network, which is run by Ryan McMahon. And we've just wrapped up our 5th season. So we have over 50 episodes. And we do more than just critique pop culture portrayals of Indigenous peoples. We do a lot of world building. And that came about because, all of this was happening during Idle No More. And Idle No More was really this kind of tumultuous time. People were talking about Indigenous issues in the public sphere in ways that I hadn't seen before, except I guess the only thing I could compare it to is I was around during Oka. That's how old I was. So kind of during that time. But this time, Indigenous peoples were leading the conversation. And so we were thinking about what would our end goal be? Like if we could have, we're a post-apocalyptic people. Indigenous peoples are all post-apocalyptic. We've gone through world-ending events and we still managed to survive. So we rejected the idea that things have to get worse, that things have to become so much more apocalyptic before Indigenous peoples and the rest of humanity could have sort of, our version of utopia, like good times. Okay, everything's great. So if we want that, if we want those good times, and we want a life that's good for everybody, what would that look like, and how would we get there? And so in our podcast, we ended up doing sort of silly plays and things like that, and imagining ourselves in the future. In ways that were good and healthy and relatable and all of that. So that became a big part of our podcast. We weren't just watching shows anymore and throwing popcorn at the screen and being like, boo, hiss. Now we were like, let's imagine 350 years into the future. So that sort of thinking, that world building that we were doing went into a chapter in this graphic novel, This Place 150 Years Retold. And it's a really cool resource. If you haven't seen it, it sort of goes through, it takes, stories by different Indigenous writers, over the past 150 years of, Canadian history, because this came out on the 150th, anniversary or birthday of Canada. And it talks about these different events from the points of view of people like, back in history, up to the present day. And then I got to do the final chapter, which was a futuristic chapter. And this is my character, Wabanatsigos. So Kitaskinau, 2350. So Kitaskinau in Cree means our land, like all of us. Our land, our earth. And that's what it's referring to. So it's about a Cree Métis girl. She lives in this decolonized world in 2350. And the cool thing about this is, like, I don't know if you're Star Trek fans or anything, but in Star Trek and a lot of sci-fi, when you are in the extreme future, they never really explain like in detail how they got there, right? They just go there. You're in the 24th century, everything's great. So we wanted to do that too. We just wanted to be like, okay, we're going to skip over the details. We're going to go and talk about this awesome place we want to live in, and then maybe we'll backfill it. We'll figure out how to get there. So Wabanatsigos travels back in time to understand the mentality of people who left Earth for Mars back in the 21st century, aka now. So the idea is that people in today's time, rather than trying to find solutions to, catastrophic ecological collapse, to mass human migration and all the problems that we're seeing, instead of trying to stay here and fix it, they just like run off to Mars and live there for 300 years and don't change their mentality. And eventually they come back to Kitaskinau and cause a bit of conflict. So that story is about that. And it was very cool because I write, but I don't draw. I didn't draw this. So I had to work with an artist and like tell them, this is what I want. I want a futuristic city, and I want traditional stuff. And I want the traditional and the futuristic to live side by side, because why not? And Tara Audibert, the artist, drew this amazing world that made the story so much cooler. Now it's not just my story. She's put her work into it as well. And then we had to have a colorist come in, do all the colors. We had to have somebody who comes in and puts all the words in. Anyway, if you ever get a chance to work on a graphic novel, highly recommend. It's a great collaborative project, super fun. And you have all these really talented people that bring their art and their perspectives into the project. And all of a sudden it's more than you could have ever envisioned yourself. So this is us cosplaying ourselves because why not? So now Molly Swain and I are writing a whole graphic novel based in this Métis in space universe, where we're really looking for, getting to a decolonized future together, like all of us, right? All human beings, all non-human beings, the land, the air, the water. So graphic novels are really cool, very complicated to put together, takes a lot of time. That's my excuse. COVID hasn't helped either. All this to say that we should have been done the script by now, but we're working on it. It'll happen slowly. One of the things I'm really trying to do these days, after 6 months of a pandemic, is just take the time to be okay and just like, I don't know, not worry myself so much with deadlines, because so much of what we want to do is on hold anyway. Okay, so I'd mentioned a land trust. I'm just going to take a little sip of amiskwacîwâskihikan here, some tea. All right, so we're a podcast. We're Métis in space. We're nerds. We do sci-fi stuff. And now we have land. How the heck did that happen? So we launched a project called Back to the Land, Too Land, Too Furious. You might be able to tell that we're like sort of fans of the Fast and Furious franchise. It's so cheesy. So we have long sort of discussed the need for access to land, particularly for urban Indigenous youth. One of the things that is happening right now is there's, this resurgence in Indigenous culture, and people are always saying, go back to the land, go back to the land. Well, a lot of us who live in the cities, it's hard to get out to the land, and the land isn't always available or welcoming. So we needed a piece of land for research, cultural activities, education. We want to bring folks from, particularly inner city youth, so Black and Indigenous inner city youth out there to go do, land-based learning. And in order to do that, we needed land. So we decided to start a fundraiser. Again, probably avoiding something. We're like, we have this deadline coming up. Let's raise money for land. We figured it would take about a year, maybe more, to raise enough land to buy, raise enough money to buy some land. It ended up happening in a few weeks. We had what we call like a settler angel from across the medicine line down in the United States, donated enough money for us to buy 160 acres of land in Lac Ste County in my territory. It has a small lake on it with swans, geese, loons, ducks. It's really cacophonous. We went out there and there's so many species of waterfowl out there. It's an ecological treasure. Now we had all sorts of plans to get out there and start, doing amazing things. But again, COVID, we don't even have a road onto the land yet. And to get the road built is going to take a bit. So things have had to slow down, which probably is good for our mental and physical health, to be honest. So now we have a land trust, and the land trust means that we don't personally own this land. The land is held in trust for future generations. So it's a way under settler colonial law, using private property, which we're not wild about, because we really do want the rematriation of lands to Indigenous peoples. We want land back. But we decided to go this route because it does provide protection for the land over a series of generations so that we can't lose it if we become very poor, which is a reality. A lot of Métis are landless because when the Canadian government was trying to deal with us and extinguish our Aboriginal rights, they handed out scrip. They handed out land. They're like, here's your land back. And then speculators came and took the land, stole the land. So a lot of us ended up without any land anymore. And we want to avoid repeating history. All right. And the other thing that I've been doing is, like I said, I've been teaching the Cree language at the Faculty of Native Studies at the University of Alberta. And I did my master's degree there in Métis futurisms. So again, world building. Okay. My thesis included short stories where I reimagined Métis people in the past. So I have a story about a Rougarou, shape-changing woman back in, the 1800s. And I imagine what happened if Canada could never expanded into the West, and so we were still independent peoples. I talk about a Métis superhero who has incredible strength, but nobody who's unrelated to him could remember him, so he can never become very famous. I talk about using nanotechnology to help people learn their languages, all sorts of things. So you imagine futurisms are not just about the future, they're about the past, present, and the future. And so now I'm expanding that thesis, those short stories, into a book, which is going to be published by Arsenal Pulp Press next year, which of course I'm behind on as well. So it's okay. You can be behind on things and still eventually get them done. All right. What have I done other than that in between everything else? Well, I've done a lot of talking over the years. I do a lot of talks. I talk to politicians. I talk to doctors, lawyers, teachers, farmers, students, just a whole whack of people. Anybody who wants me to come in and sort of talk to them about Indigenous issues, about our hopes for the future and what kinds of things that we want to see now. I do that. I'm a little bit on social media. I've been on Twitter for a really long time, but you can see I'm trying to get off social media It's every time I think I'm out, they suck me back in. But yeah, that's it. That's the end of my presentation. I've been doing a lot of things, but now right now, I just want to hear questions from you folks.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Chelsea. What a fantastic presentation. You are a wildly creative person, and we should all aspire to do half of what you do. So we're going to dive in with questions, guys. For anyone who's joining on YouTube or Facebook, if you want to let me know in the chat bar where you're joining from, share some questions there. We'll take as many as we can. What we'll do to start is go to Ms. Hall's class. Ms. Hall's class is grade 12s joining us in Toronto. Ms. Hall, if you want to come into the broadcast and share a question on behalf of your students, go for it. Come on in, just demute your mic and you're good to go.
Hi there. I'm just waiting for my students to respond to the chat. But thank you very much for that amazing presentation. And I have a question for myself. What might you recommend for youth to do to get involved in the broader kind of issues that are going on currently? Specifically talking about the there's so many things
what's going on in Mi'kma'ki and Land Back Lane and stuff.
Yeah.
Well, so I think social media gets vilified a lot. Even I do it, because it's a massive time suck sometimes, and it can be a place of extreme negativity. On the other hand, it's also a place where people can share information about what's happening, like in real time, stuff that you don't necessarily learn about in mainstream media until maybe a day or two later. And it's often coming from the people themselves that are engaged in whatever sort of situation's happening. And what I do find amazing is that people online, you're thinking about what's happening in Mi'kma'ki and in Mi'kmaq territory right now. This tension between fishermen and non-native fishermen and stuff like that. And what's that all about? How do you get that information? And what you'll see is you have independent Mi'kmaq media on the ground, providing all sorts of information. People put together reading lists. They put together calls for action. They tell you what they need in the moment. Sometimes it's material supplies. They're like, hey, we need tarps, we need firewood. Sometimes they give you a list of readings. They're like, hey, find out more about this situation. Here's the text of the treaty. Here's an interpretation of the treaty. Here's a bunch of information that will help you understand the whole situation better. And those materials are almost always, linked to and free, right? So students who are interested in that topic can go read those fantastic reading lists that people are putting together, and figure out like what they want to do. Is this something that interests them? Do they want to participate in some way? Can they maybe show solidarity at their school? In their communities, bring attention to it, and show Mi'kmaq people that others stand with them. Those shows of solidarity are really important as well. And the thing is you want to know what to do. Well, Indigenous peoples are always telling you. There's always a list being circulated out there saying this is how you can help, and these are the different ways that you can help. So I do think that for this reason, social media does provide a lot of the answers that people are looking for.
Yep. Fantastic. Thanks, Chelsea. And great first question, Ms. Hall. We're going to go to Humberside Collegiate right now for Ms. Howard's class, and then we'll take a few questions from YouTube as well. So Ms. Howard's class, come on in and go for it. If you have questions for us. And if you don't, we can come back in a bit. Don't worry.
On the screen, someone must say something.
I can come back in a second, guys. No worries. I know high school, I'm not necessarily running up to the classroom, but so I'll come back in a minute. What I'll do is take a question from Miss Neely's class joining us online. What is your favorite project you've worked on, Chelsea? If you can pick.
Oh yeah. Okay. Definitely the Métis in Space podcast. So I started it with Molly around the time that I Don't Know More was really kicking off. And so here we are every day talking about really hard issues, murdered and missing Indigenous women. We're talking about police brutality. We're talking about, trying to have the treaties respected, historic injustice, all of these things, right? And it's heavy duty. It's ongoing. It's crisis after crisis. It can get really depressing. It can kind of bring you down. So I was feeling very drained all the time, but also I felt like I had this huge responsibility to always respond to questions and people's calls for education. And yeah, I did. It was depressing. So starting the Métis in Space podcast allowed us to have fun. And I think like Indigenous joy is so important, and joy in general, right? All of us have so many responsibilities, whether it's school, it's to our families, we have these hopes and dreams that we have to work towards, right? And that can really put a lot of pressure on you. And if you don't find something that makes you happy and gives you joy, then it's hard to keep going. And I don't say that you need to go find joy so that you produce better under capitalism, or that you can it's not a form of self-care that allows you to regenerate and do more work. It's not about that, but it's really about filling you up with good relationships and making you feel connected. And those are relationships that you build cross communities. Like I'm thinking about with this podcast, we met so many other Indigenous nerds. We didn't know they existed. And now there's this incredible community of Indigenous nerds that's always been there. And now we have people that we can work with and things like that. And it's expanded beyond ourselves and turned into something where, a whole whack of Indigenous peoples are collaborating on trying to envision a better future. And if we don't have time to do that sort of thinking, we're always mired in the day-to-day, struggle of just living, then we're never going to get to that place we want to be. So yeah, for me, it's sitting around watching cheesy sci-fi with Indigenous peoples in it and just laughing about the terrible portrayals. It's a love-hate relationship with these shows. I really do love sci-fi, but sometimes I'm like, can you just not?
Yeah. I love that you mentioned joy as sort of a central element of your own work. One of the things we've seen with Leela, Angela over the last few days on the Gord Downey Cheney Wenjack Fund Secret Path Week has been just pure joy and such an exciting story. So check out our YouTube channel if you want to see more stories like that. Métis in Space, I brought it up in a banner on the bottom. So if you want to check that out, please do. It's a really amazing program. So yeah, we'll check into that. Now, before I go back to Humberside and some of our YouTube questions, so you create a lot of stuff with some really fantastic Indigenous representation, and you talk about poking fun at some of the bad examples of it in sort of mainstream media. Are there good examples in mainstream media? Is there any show or podcast or movie that does a good job of this in your estimation?
No. It's funny because as we've done this over a series of years now, and we found that around sort of the late 80s, early 90s, representation actually started to be better. And then it went downhill again to stereotypes. So I would say in terms of maybe not mainstream, although it's becoming more mainstream, more Indigenous creators are now the ones propelling and creating the content. So you've got Jeff Barnaby, who sort of really dabbles in horror. You've got all sorts of amazing stories coming out of the North. So Inuit creators, people doing sci-fi and stuff, and it's all Native people telling sci-fi stories, or not just sci-fi, right? But those, if you can seek out those Indigenous creators, when we have a chance to tell our own stories, it's so awesome. It's so much better than somebody doing it for us. So the great thing is that it really is a question of money. So please, billionaires, throw money at our Indigenous creators, but we are seeing more and more Indigenous content in the mainstream, and I think that's really exciting. I mean, we've got this Trickster series now. I love that trilogy by Eden Robinson, and now it's on CBC Gem. If you get a chance to watch it, it's irreverent, it's scatological, it's scary. None of this noble savage stuff. I think it's something that's going to appeal to youth and adults alike, and provide a different perspective of what it's like to be an Indigenous person, and to show the variety of our worldviews. So I'm very, very excited about the fact that we're making our own stuff now.
Fantastic. Trickster, so I just put that up. So it's not the Trickster on CBC, it's just Trickster. Check it out, 2020. Really fantastic rating. So I'm glad we got a chance to bring that up. And I'm trying to bring up everything you mentioned on screen as quick as I can. So
It's a lot.
So we're going to go back to Humberside. If you guys have a question now, fantastic. Then we'll take some from YouTube and do another round of questions. So Humberside, come on up, guys. Go for it. Hi.
So you were talking about this project where you're taking the inner city students to the land. So I just wanted to know if you'd talk about some specifics about it. You know, like how many students you have doing that, what they're going to do on the land, who's taking them there. So that I'd just like to know a lot more about that whole project.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. So like I said, it's a bit delayed right now. We have some, we have to put in some infrastructure into the land first. So we need road access. We need to dig a well. So these are some of the things that we're going to have to fundraise for. We need to get a sea can on the land so we can store materials. Like I'm gonna send the bill to Trudeau because at one point he said that we need canoe storage, and so that's our canoe storage project. Is okay. Give us the canoe storage, please, Trudeau, because we have a lake there that we can go out on. So the idea is we want to work with organizations who already do this kind of programming for inner city youth. So in Edmonton here, we have Bent Arrow Society, for example, that works with a lot of inner city youth and kids in care. And you know, there's so many groups doing the work. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. And because Molly and I and our other board member, we're all busy. You know, we're not going to suddenly come up with this programming. What we're going to do is we're going to make sure that everything is set up on the land so that these organizations can bring groups out. And some of the things that are happening right now that we want to tap into as well is throughout Canada, there are Indigenous groups that put together like hide working workshops where they take a moose hide and they work with youth to show them how to scrape the hide, how to prepare the hide, tan the hide, and then use the hide later for projects and things like that. And we really want people to come out onto the land and have knowledge keepers do these workshops with them. You know, whether it's like, I used to think when I was like all of my kids were quite a bit younger, that it's a shame we don't have an Indigenous Boy Scouts, right? Like if I want my urban kids to go out and learn how to like survive in the wilderness and build fires and stuff like that, I would have them join the Girl or Boy Scouts. I was like, why don't we have something like that where we're taking kids out and they're learning survival skills? Because if you've ever had that opportunity, it's awesome. Like to just be able to like start a fire in any condition. It sounds like, well, that's not a very useful skill. But I think with all of this stuff going on right now with the pandemic, we're starting to realize that going back to some of those essential skills is actually quite important. You know, do we know how to grow our own food? Can we even recognize the spoor of animals on the land we're at? Do we know which herbs are medicinal? Do we know which herbs are edible? Do we know which herbs are poisonous? You know, and all of that. And I want people to come out there and do research on you know, prairie rewilding. You know, we used to have prairie grasses here when the buffalo roamed that went down, root systems that went down like 20 feet or more. And that sequesters so much carbon, much more so than trees. And if there's a fire, it just burns off the top layer, but the carbon's still in the soil. So there's all of these things that we could be doing on the land, research, cultural activities, you know, bringing kids out and learning skills. It's sort of limitless. And so here I'm getting all excited about it again and frustrated that we can't do it right this second. But COVID has slowed us down, and now we can think about it a bit more and plan things out. But you know, it's really whatever resources you can tap into, and that's why relationships are so important. Because do I know a hide worker? Yes. Can I get somebody out there? Can I get somebody out there to do stories in the winter? Because that's when we do our storytelling, things like that. It's anything that we set our minds to is what we're going to do out there.
I think next year what we'll do is we actually will end the broadcast at this point and send kids out. Like we'll set it up in advance. We'll do it. They'll get out in nature, and then they'll come back in like an hour and a half. That's awesome. Quick note, I'm terribly sorry. If you want to end your screen share so you can see us a little better in the broadcast, you're welcome to do that. It's not on the screen for us, but you can get rid of it. It might make it easier for you to see us for a conversation. What I want to do now is bring up a question from Miss Gill's class. They're joining us in Cambridge, Ontario. And so Kate in their class wants to know, what other books would you recommend for students to read, Chelsea?
Oh, man. Okay, so I love this because there's so many now. Even just like 10 years ago, the list was small, you know, but oh gosh. Okay, well, it really depends. what you want, right? Are you looking for information about, are you looking for nonfiction about Indigenous peoples? There's a lot of great memoirs out there, for example. So memoir is a genre where people talk about their lives, and it can give you this really interesting insight into, into their particular experiences, and often it spills over into the experiences of their communities. So memoir is a big one. You got David Robertson just came out with a memoir. You've got Jesse Thistle, who talks about, he's Métis, talks about what it was like when he was homeless. He's done a lot of work on sort of redefining Indigenous homelessness. You've got Lindsay Nixon. They have their memoir Nitsnak, talking about growing up, sort of in foster care in the prairies, and talking about prairie kinship. And there's so many more. Okay, so there's memoir. You've got Michael Hutchinson, who used to be a reporter on APTN, is doing a series of young adult mysteries set on the res. So you've got like this group of kids who goes around on the res solving mysteries. But it also gives you a lot of information about, the 60 scoop, child welfare, things like that. Honestly, like there's so many books right now coming out written by Indigenous peoples that your best bet is bookstores more and more are curating lists. Now, if I were to say, like, if you were like, okay, but I need one book right now, I would say Arthur Manuel has 2 books. There's one, it's trying to remember, it's like Upsettling Canada and the Reconciliation Manifesto. Those 2 books give you a history of Indigenous organizing, throughout the decades. And I think it's essential because it shows you how what's happening today hasn't improved that much. And the same people, like he names names too. So people in government now, he talks about what they were doing 20 years ago. And so because I think it's really important that you recognize the living conditions for Indigenous peoples in this country are not materially better than they were 20, 30, 40 years ago. Things are not getting better for us. And so it's easy to listen to all the rhetoric, the political rhetoric, and believe that because time passes, everything gets better. Those books will give you some really good grounding in sort of the history of all of that.
Fantastic, Chelsea. That was a lot of resources. You mentioned Jesse Thistle. Was a name that was familiar to me because we did a broadcast with him, I think, last year. That was one of the most popular Secret Path Week podcasts we've ever done. So thank you for mentioning him. Arthur Manuel's books, again, on the screen. Check out Arthur Manuel. We got a lot of high schoolers today, so you guys are equipped to grapple with these issues, to talk, learn about this. One thing for me personally that was really impactful was finding out about long-term boil water advisories.
Oh, yeah.
Is being talked about in the government now and in a lot of classrooms too. You look up long-term boil water advisories and what long-term means and how long these have been in place across Canada, you will be absolutely shocked at how many people in Canada are not water secure, which is probably the most basic of human rights, most basic of things that we sort of think of in Canada. As you turn on the tap, you get fresh, clean water. So encourage you guys to check that out as well. And great questions, great answers, Chelsea. All right, I want to go back to our live class for 2 more questions. And amazingly, we're nearing the end of the broadcast. Time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah.
But Miss Hall's class, if you guys want to come back in and ask another, and then we'll go back to Humberside in a minute. So Miss Hall, come on in and go for it.
Hi, thank you. One of my students wants to know when your creativity started, if you were very creative and artistic as a child.
Oh, yeah, I was a weird kid. Yeah, definitely. Like, actually, my mom was cleaning out some stuff that she had recently, and she gave me a binder of this book that I wrote when I was like 15. It's like the equivalent of going back, if you were on LiveJournal or anything like that and you were doing stuff online, fan fiction and whatnot. It was terrible. I reread it and I'm like, I'm so glad this is never going to make it out into the world. I made my kids promise never to publish it. But yeah, I was always a huge sci-fi nerd and fantasy as well, right? It's really hard to sort of like draw a clear, bright line between fantasy and science fiction. And so I read, you got to realize this is mind-blowing, I know, but I grew up before the internet. Like, I was an adult when I got access to the internet. So for us, entertainment was like, whatever happened to be showing on TV at the time. There was no streaming, there was no on demand. So I would watch Star Trek Next Generation with my family. That was a big deal. And I lived out in the country, so I would go to the Wabamun Public School Library, and we would just get like 2 weeks worth of books and just sit there and read voraciously. So I read everything I could get my hands on, like literally read the section out. I read everything they had there. And yeah, I think for me, it was that. It was the best form of escapism. You know, I could read these books and not be in the middle of nowhere, not really loving school and everything. I could imagine all these different worlds. And so that's never really stopped. And I didn't realize that there was a space for that, because I didn't, you know, it wasn't like I was hanging out with artists and writers and stuff. Like now I know artists and writers. I didn't know that was a possibility at the time at all. I didn't even know going to university was a possibility. I'm the first person in my family to ever go to university. So I didn't realize when I was younger that creativity could take me anywhere. And now it's like, now it's everything.
Fantastic. It's amazing how many of the people we bring on this broadcast, and no matter what their topic is, that their origin story is that they read every book in the library. So get out, read, whatever genre you're interested in. It will lead to a lot of great things and hopefully end up being as creative a person as Chelsea out of it. All right. I want to go back to Humberside with a student right in front of the camera. Thanks, man. So come on in and go for it.
Yeah. Do you have any other projects lined up after you do the ones that you've already thought of?
Oh, wow. I mean, the land project is going to be huge, because as I said, like, there's so many things that we want to do. So a lot of my mental energy right now is on that. You know, we want to build a tiny home. We want to like have a tiny home building sort of session. And then we want to have writers and artists come out and do residencies on the land, where they're out there for a couple weeks, you know, with food and everything, and no distractions, and just getting their work done, because that's something I've discovered when I really had to do my my thesis and I had to sit down and write. Not having distractions makes a big deal. It makes a big difference in getting it done. But actually, it's funny you say this, because so I never wanted to be a nonfiction writer, and I'm best known for this nonfiction book that I wrote, Indigenous Rights. I've started doing some fiction now that's being published, but I always wanted to write sci-fi. And over this pandemic, I've been inhaling trashy thrillers. Like, I never thought I would like that. I was like, no, I'm sci-fi to the core, but I really like trashy thrillers. And so I think I'm going to start writing some trashy thrillers in the new year, like just pure escapism. Like I want to do all this like real work on the ground, on the land with people, but I also want to just create trashy escapism, because I have found during this pandemic that it's been huge to be able to read stories about people who make such bad decisions. It makes you feel better about your own life. You're like, wow, if you just communicated and didn't lie all the time and maybe didn't commit murder, life could be a lot simpler. So yeah, that's kind of what I've got planned.
That was glorious. Thank you for that answer. We had Miss Neely's class that also asked the same thing, so we covered that. That's awesome. By the way, you're the first person in the history of Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants to say that your next ambition is trashy thriller, so I appreciate that so much. In fact, your candor in general, beginning the broadcast with, I have 6 children and I am exhausted. Thank you for that. As opposed to, I can do it all and it's so easy.
No.
Chelsea, this has been a real pleasure. I want to wrap up in just a minute for our students that are tuning in on YouTube Live. Just a few resources to check out. Again, this is part of our Downey Wenjack Fund Seeker Path Week. So check out downeywenjack.ca. Amazing resources, education guides, and more. An incredible resource. If you want to check out some of our past videos on YouTube, you can do so on our YouTube channel. Check out our Seeker Path Week lineup of programs past and in the next few days there. And one of our partners over the last few years has been Canadian Geographic, which has partnered with Indigenous communities for the Indigenous Peoples Atlas of Canada, which is a really beautiful series of books and information online, and really, really informative, covers a huge, broad, and almost comprehensive, insofar as you can do that, information on a lot of amazing things that you guys are keen to learn today. So check that out. And of course, more importantly, this place, or 150 years retold, Métis in space. Check those out. Chelsea's resources are amazing, so I hope you get a chance to do that when you're done the broadcast. Chelsea, before we wrap up today, is there any last message you'd like to share with our students tuning in? Anything that they can take home as an action item to do today when they leave this broadcast?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing you can do is care. All of us are super busy with our own lives, right? And it can feel really disempowering and overwhelming looking at the political situation. And this is true not just in your generation, this is in every generation, right? The kinds of systems that we have in place are not working for any of us on this planet. They're responsible for the destruction of so much habitat. It's changing our climate. It's creating crises of just unbelievable proportions, right? So it can feel like we're in the apocalypse right now. So what I want you to take out of this is hope, is the fact that like we have ways of surviving, and none of those ways involve hiding in a sea can with your guns and stuff like that. The way that Indigenous peoples have survived multiple apocalypses is by expanding our kinship, by caring for one another more, by paying attention to what's going on locally, and making those connections that allow us to be resilient. So, that I think that's the most important thing you can do in your life in general, because all of us experience moments in our life where everything just falls apart. And when that happens, we need to look around and see who's there to help us out. And if you don't have anybody, then you need to make those relationships stronger. That's true of individuals and communities, of everything that's happening in our planet. So, focus on relationships, focus on building meaningful, healthy relationships with other people, because that's what's going to get you through all of it as an individual and us as a human family.
Yep. That's a beautiful message, and not one that we cover a lot in these broadcasts: empathy, kindness, relationships, connections with other people. So thank you so much for ending with that, and for a beautiful and very funny presentation today. I really appreciate it, and I hope people do take up the call to do those relationships and to learn more about the amazing work that you've done and are continuing to do amidst COVID and for the years to come. Chelsea, what we want to wrap up with, what we always do at the end of every broadcast, I'm going to bring in our teachers. So Humberside Collegiate, Miss Hall, if you guys want to join me in saying a big thank you and goodbye to Chelsea today, and thank you for joining us. You're all in the broadcast. Go for it. Thank you so much, guys.